The chill hit Amara first, a brutal shock that stole her breath, not unlike the sudden panic that had seized her a moment before. She'd been flying down the deserted road, the pale glow of her headlights cutting through the lingering mist, her mind a frantic scramble of anatomy terms and pharmacology dosages. Today was the day. Her final exams. The culmination of 4 years of sleepless nights and caffeine-fueled study sessions, all leading to the promise of a bright future as a registered nurse. Then, a glint in the periphery, a flash of something unnatural by the lake's edge. Her foot slammed on the brake, the tires screaming a protest against the sudden stop. A figure, barely visible in the encroaching gloom, struggling against the dark water, a faint, desperate cry carried on the biting wind. Without a second thought, Amara had stripped off her green nursing scrubs, the fabric of familiar comfort she was now abandoning for something far more primal. The water was a black silk sheet, deceptively calm on the surface, but beneath, an unseen current tugged with insidious strength. Her muscles protested the sudden exertion, still stiff from sleep, but adrenaline surged, a potent cocktail that sharpened her focus. The woman was older, her face a mask of terror, her frail body thrashing weakly. Amara reached her, her strong arms encircling the woman's waist, the cold seeping into her bones. "Hold on," Amara gasped, her voice hoarse, fighting the instinct to shiver. "I've got you," the woman's eyes, wide and unfocused, seemed to plead more than understand. Amara kicked, a desperate, powerful rhythm against the water's pull, her lungs burning. The shore, a distant promise a moment ago, now felt impossibly far. She could feel the woman's weight, heavy and unresponsive, a dead weight that threatened to drag them both down. Every stroke was a battle, every breath a victory. The cold was a living entity, an insidious predator trying to claim them both. Finally, her fingers scraped against the muddy bank, a rough, glorious sensation. She heaved, dragging the unconscious woman onto the damp grass, her own body shaking uncontrollably. The first rays of the sun, a cold, indifferent gold, began to paint the sky, illuminating the scene with a stark, brutal clarity. The woman lay still, her skin a pallid blue, her lips tinged with purple. Amara's training kicked in, an automatic response honed by countless hours in simulation labs. She checked for a pulse, a faint, thready beat under her trembling fingers. CPR. She began compressions, her rhythmic pushes a desperate prayer against the encroaching silence. The world narrowed to the woman's still chest, the gasps for air, the primal urge to keep this fragile life from slipping away. She didn't know who this woman was, didn't care. All that mattered was the flickering flame of life she was fighting to keep alive. The siren wail, a distant promise, grew louder, cutting through the morning silence. Relief, sharp and painful, flooded her. She had done all she could. She had given everything. The cold, however, had already begun its insidious work, chilling her to the bone, a premonition of the darkness that was about to descend, a darkness far more profound than the lake's depths. The paramedics arrived in a flurry of flashing lights and urgent voices, their movements practiced and efficient. Amara, shivering uncontrollably, watched them work, her own body a mass of aches and tremors. They loaded the old woman onto a stretcher, her face still disturbingly pale, but a faint, regular heartbeat now registered on their monitor. "You did good, young lady," one of the paramedics, a kind-faced woman with tired eyes, said, offering Amara a thermal blanket. "You saved her life," Amara nodded, unable to speak, her teeth chattering. The warmth of the blanket was a small comfort, but the chill had already settled deep within her, a physical manifestation of the morning's trauma. Her scrubs, crumpled and soaked, lay discarded on the grass, a stark reminder of her abandoned exam. The thought of it, of her future, now felt distant, almost irrelevant. All that mattered was the image of the woman's lifeless face, the desperate struggle against the water. A police officer approached her, notebook in hand, his expression serious. "Can you tell me what happened, ma'am?" Amara recounted the events, her voice raspy, the words tumbling out in a rush. She described the faint cries, the struggle in the water, her own impulsive dive. He listened patiently, occasionally interjecting with a question. As she spoke, a sleek black sedan, tinted windows gleaming in the rising sun, pulled up to the scene. It was an expensive car, the kind that screamed power and privilege. Two men, built like brick walls in tailored suits, emerged from the vehicle. Their faces were grim, their eyes scanning the scene with an intensity that sent a shiver down Amara's spine. Unrelated to the cold, they moved with an unnerving grace, their gazes settling on the stretcher where the old woman lay. One of them, a man with sharp features and an aura of quiet menace, approached the paramedics, his voice a low, urgent murmur. His eyes, dark and piercing, swept over Amara, a brief, assessing glance that made her feel utterly exposed, like a deer caught in headlights. He said nothing to her, his focus entirely on the old woman. It was clear, even to Amara in her dazed state, that this was no ordinary family. The air around them crackled with an unspoken tension, a silent threat that hung heavy in the crisp morning air. The officer finished taking her statement, handing her a card with a case number. "You'll need to make a formal statement at the station later, ma'am." Just for protocol, Amara nodded, her mind already drifting. The paramedics were now closing the ambulance doors, the old woman secured inside. The man in the suit watched, his expression unreadable. As the ambulance pulled away, followed closely by the black sedan, he turned, his gaze once again sweeping over Amara. This time, it lingered, a silent, unsettling appraisal. There was a cold intelligence in his eyes, a depth that hinted at something far more complex than simple concern. He was a predator, she realized, instinctively shrinking back. He didn't speak, didn't approach. He simply looked, a silent judgment that felt colder than the lake's embrace. Then, as quickly as he had appeared, he turned and got back into his car, the powerful engine purring to life. The sedan followed the ambulance, leaving Amara standing alone, shivering in the morning light, a strange sense of dread settling over her. She had saved a life, yes, but she had also stumbled into something far darker, something that whispered of danger and secrets. The green scrubs, now a sodden heap, seemed to mock her, a symbol of a life she was rapidly losing control of. Her final exams, her carefully constructed future, now seemed impossibly far away, overshadowed by the chilling silence of the black sedan and the piercing gaze of the man within. The hospital waiting room was a sterile tableau of hushed anxieties and fluorescent lighting. Amara, still wrapped in the thermal blanket, felt utterly out of place. She'd insisted on coming, a lingering sense of responsibility for the woman she'd pulled from the lake. The paramedics had tried to dissuade her, citing her own exposure and the need for rest, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she needed to see this through. Her phone, now mostly dry, was buzzing with panicked texts from her roommate, Chloe, wondering where she was, why she'd missed her exam. Amara ignored them, her focus elsewhere. The man from the black sedan, the one with the piercing eyes, was there, pacing the length of the waiting room like a caged panther. He was even more imposing up close, his expensive suit a stark contrast to Amara's disheveled state. He wasn't alone. Several other men, equally well-dressed and radiating a similar aura of quiet menace, stood sentinel around him, their eyes constantly sweeping the room. It was like a scene from a movie, a shadowy world she had only ever glimpsed on screens. He caught her eye, his gaze unwavering, and for a moment, Amara felt a jolt of recognition, a silent acknowledgement of their shared connection to the morning's events. He still didn't speak, didn't approach, but the intensity of his stare was a conversation in itself, a silent interrogation. A doctor, a harried-looking man with a clipboard, emerged from the double doors, his face etched with a mix of relief and exhaustion. The man in the suit, whose name Amara still didn't know, immediately stepped forward, his voice low and urgent. "How is she?" The doctor offered a small smile. "She's stable. Hypothermia was severe, but thanks to the quick thinking of a very brave young woman, we managed to stabilize her. She's going to make a full recovery." The man's shoulders visibly relaxed, a subtle shift that spoke volumes. He nodded, a curt gesture of acknowledgement. Then, his eyes found Amara again, and this time, There was a flicker of something new in their depths, something that looked suspiciously like gratitude, quickly masked. He finally approached her, his footsteps silent on the linoleum floor. The other men remained at a respectful distance, their gazes still watchful. "You saved my mother's life," he said, his voice a low rumble, surprisingly devoid of emotion. "My name is Desham, and I owe you, Amara." Still reeling from the events, could only stare. His mother. The pieces clicked into place. The expensive car, the bodyguards, the palpable tension. This wasn't just a wealthy family. This was something else entirely. "Amara," she managed to croak, her voice still hoarse. "I'm Amara." Desham's eyes, dark and intense, held hers. There was a raw power in his presence, an undeniable magnetism that was both terrifying and strangely captivating. "Amara," he repeated, the name a soft caress on his lips. "I will not forget this debt. Anything you need, consider it done." He offered no explanation, no further details, simply a statement of fact, a promise that felt both comforting and deeply unsettling. Amara felt a shiver run down her spine, a different kind of chill than the one from the lake. This man, Desham, was a force of nature, a dangerous whirlwind she had inadvertently stepped into. She had saved a life, yes, but in doing so, she had entangled herself in a web she knew nothing about, a web that shimmered with both immense power and unimaginable peril. The fluorescent lights hummed, casting long, distorted shadows, and Amara realized that her carefully constructed life, her future as a nurse, had just taken an unexpected, terrifying detour. The days that followed were a blur of bewildered phone calls, rescheduled exams, and an unsettling undercurrent of Desham's presence. He had sent a car, a sleek black sedan identical to his own, to pick her up from the hospital, insisting she be taken home. A driver, a silent, imposing man named Jay, had been assigned to her, a constant, watchful shadow. Amara felt like a princess in a gilded cage, her every movement observed, her independence subtly eroded. She tried to protest, to explain that she could take care of herself, but Desham's instructions, relayed through Jay, were firm and unyielding. "Mr. Lee insists on ensuring your safety and comfort as a token of his gratitude." It was a polite prison, a golden handcuff. Her apartment, usually a sanctuary of textbooks and cheap takeout, felt strange, alien. Jay would wait patiently downstairs, always there, always watching. He would drive her to her rescheduled exams, waiting outside the building until she was done, then whisk her back. It was unnerving, this constant surveillance, this unspoken claim. Her friends, especially Chloe, were a mix of concerned and bewildered. "Who is this guy, Amara? And why is he treating you like you're some kind of royalty?" Chloe had asked, her eyes wide with a mix of awe and suspicion. Amara had no answers, only vague theories about powerful businessmen and hidden wealth. She couldn't bring herself to confess the full extent of the unease that settled in her stomach every time she saw Jay's impassive face. Desham himself remained a distant, enigmatic figure. He called occasionally, his voice a low, resonant rumble, always inquiring about her well-being, her studies, ensuring she had everything she needed. His questions were always precise, his tone polite, but there was an underlying current of authority that brooked no argument. He never mentioned the lake, never spoke of his mother, but the unspoken debt hung heavy in the air between them, a silent promise and a looming threat. Amara found herself constantly looking over her shoulder, a phantom chill always present. She tried to focus on her studies, to reclaim some semblance of normalcy, but the image of Desham's piercing eyes, the silent power of his presence, was a constant distraction. One evening, after a particularly grueling study session, she found herself staring out her window, watching Jay's car parked discreetly across the street. A sudden pang of loneliness, sharp and unexpected, pierced through her. She was safe, yes, but she was also isolated, cut off from her old life by this strange, unspoken arrangement. She picked up her phone, her fingers hovering over Chloe's number, then stopped. What could she say? How could she explain the feeling of being both protected and imprisoned by a man she barely knew, a man who radiated a dangerous allure she couldn't quite shake? She was tired of the whispers, the unanswered questions, the subtle shifts in her life that she couldn't control. She felt a surge of defiance. This wasn't her life. She was Amara, a nursing student, a woman who saved lives, not a pawn in some elaborate game. The debt, she realized, was not justice to her, but hers to herself, a debt to reclaim her own agency, her own future, from the shadow of Daisham's enigmatic power. The first crack in Daisham's carefully constructed wall of polite distance came 2 weeks after the lake incident. Amara had been holed up in her apartment, trying to cram for a rescheduled pharmacology exam, the weight of 1,000 drug names pressing down on her. Jay, ever present, was downstairs, a silent sentinel. The phone rang, and it wasn't Chloe. Amara. Daisham's voice, a low rumble, sent a familiar shiver down her spine. My mother has asked to see you. It wasn't a request. It was a directive. Amara hesitated. She had been avoiding any further involvement with his world, clinging to the illusion of her independent life. But a part of her, the empathetic nurse in training, felt a pull towards the woman she had saved. Is she well? Amara asked, trying to sound nonchalant. She is recovering. But she is insistent. The subtle emphasis on insistent spoke volumes. Daisham's mother, it seemed, was not a woman to be trifled with, even from a hospital bed. Of course, Amara finally conceded. When can I go? The next morning, Jay drove her to a private hospital wing, a place of hushed opulence that felt far removed from the bustling public hospitals Amara was used to. The security was tight, men in suits patrolling the corridors, their eyes sharp and watchful. Daisham was waiting for her outside his mother's room, his expression unreadable. He wore a dark, impeccably tailored suit, and his presence filled the sterile hallway, making it feel less like a hospital and more like a fortress. Thank you for coming, he said, his voice softer than usual, a subtle shift that caught Amara off guard. He opened the door, gesturing for her to enter. The room was lavish, filled with fresh flowers and expensive furnishings. Mrs. Lee, the old woman Amara had saved, lay propped up in bed, her face still pale but her eyes, dark and intelligent, held a surprising warmth. She looked frail, but there was an undeniable strength about her, a quiet dignity that belied her recent brush with death. My dear girl, Mrs. Lee said, her voice a soft, melodic murmur, reaching out a delicate, baringed hand. Come closer. Amara approached the bed, a nervous flutter in her stomach. Mrs. Lee took her hand, her grip surprisingly firm. You saved my life, child. I owe you everything. Amara felt a blush creep up her neck. I just did what anyone would do, Mrs. Lee chuckled, a soft, dry sound. Not everyone, Amara. Not everyone would dive into an icy lake in the pre-dawn hours for a stranger. Her eyes, sharp and knowing, met Amara's. My son, he is a man of honor. He will ensure you are well compensated for your bravery. Amara felt a familiar discomfort. I don't want compensation, Mrs. Lee. I'm a nurse. It's what I do. Mrs. Lee's smile widened, a mischievous glint in her eyes. Ah, a stubborn one. I like that. My son, he also has a stubborn streak. She glanced at Daisham, who stood by the door, his gaze fixed on Amara, an unreadable expression on his face. But a debt is a debt, child. And my son, he takes his debts very seriously. The unspoken threat, or promise, hung in the air. Amara felt a prickle of unease. This was more than just gratitude. It was an entanglement, a binding obligation. She had not only saved a life, but she had inadvertently forged a connection to a powerful, dangerous family, a connection that now felt less like a blessing and more like a silken chain. The warmth of Mrs. Lee's hand in hers felt less comforting and more like a gentle trap, pulling her deeper into a world she never asked to be a part of. The visit to Mrs. Lee's hospital room, far from providing closure, only deepened Amara's sense of unease. The old woman's words echoed in her mind. My son, he takes his debts very seriously. It was a warning wrapped in a compliment, a stark reminder that her life was no longer entirely her own. Daisham's presence, too, remained a constant, unsettling factor. He continued to send Jay, continued to call, his quiet inquiries about her well-being feeling less like concern and more like a subtle assertion of control. Amara felt the walls closing in, the golden cage tightening around her. She tried to push back, to reclaim some semblance of her former life. She started taking the bus again, dismissing Jay with a polite but firm, "I appreciate the offer, but I need to get back to my routine." Jay, to his credit, simply nodded, his face impassive, but Amara could feel Daisham's unspoken disapproval hanging in the air. She knew he knew. He always knew. Her friends noticed the change in her, the subtle tension in her shoulders, the way she constantly checked her phone, half expecting a call from him. "You're acting weird, Amara," Chloe said one afternoon, watching her stir her coffee with an agitated hand. "What's really going on with this gratitude thing?" Amara tried to deflect, to downplay the situation, but even to her own ears, her words sounded hollow. She couldn't explain the feeling of being watched, of being owned, without sounding paranoid. She couldn't articulate the strange, dangerous allure of Daisham's power, the conflicting emotions he stirred within her. One evening, after a particularly frustrating day of trying to ignore the ever-present shadow of Daisham's influence, Amara decided she'd had enough. She needed to confront him, to set boundaries, to reclaim her life. She called him, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Daisham," she began, trying to sound firm, "we need to talk." There was a brief silence on the other end, a pause that stretched, making her wonder if she had overstepped. Then his voice, low and calm, cut through the quiet. "I agree. Meet me tomorrow evening. My mother is being discharged, and I would like to properly thank you." It wasn't a question. It was an invitation that felt like a command. He named a restaurant, an exclusive, high-end establishment she had only ever seen in magazines. Amara felt a surge of frustration, but also a reluctant curiosity. She wanted answers, and this, she realized, was her chance to get them. The next evening, Amara stood in front of her mirror, staring at her reflection. She had chosen a simple, elegant dress, wanting to project an image of understated strength, not flashy subservience. Jay arrived precisely on time, his presence a stark reminder of the world she was about to step into. The restaurant was a symphony of hushed conversations, clinking silverware, and the soft glow of candlelight. Daisham was already there, seated at a secluded table in a private alcove. He rose as she approached, his gaze sweeping over her, a flicker of something unreadable in his dark eyes. He was dressed in a dark suit, impeccably tailored, a vision of dangerous sophistication. "Amara," he said, his voice a low murmur, pulling out her chair. "Thank you for coming." The meal was a strange dance of polite conversation and unspoken tension. He asked about her studies, her plans for the future, his questions surprisingly detailed, almost as if he already knew the answers. Amara, in turn, tried to steer the conversation towards his expectations, his intentions. "Daisham," she began, finally gathering her courage, "I appreciate your gratitude, but I need you to understand that I can't accept this level of involvement in my life." He listened patiently, his gaze unwavering, a small, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips. "Amara," he said, when she had finished, his voice soft, yet undeniably firm, "you saved my mother. You saved the most important person in my life. A debt like that, it's not easily repaid. And it's certainly not forgotten." He leaned forward slightly, his eyes boring into hers, and Amara felt a jolt, a sudden awareness of the immense power he wielded. "You are now, by extension, under my protection. Whether you wish it or not," the words, spoken so calmly, were a declaration, a stark reminder of the dangerous world she had stumbled into. Amara felt a cold dread settle in her stomach, a premonition of the storm that was about to break. This was more than gratitude. This was a claim, a binding of fates she had no say in. The declaration hung heavy in the air, a silken noose around Amara's burgeoning sense of independence. "Under my protection. Whether you wish it or not," the words echoed in her mind, a chilling pronouncement that stripped away any illusion of choice. She stared at Daisham across the candlelit table, his expression unreadable, a faint, almost imperceptible challenge in his dark eyes. Her carefully constructed composure began to fray at the edges. "Daisham," she said, her voice trembling slightly despite her best efforts, "I don't understand. This isn't how I live my life. I'm a student. I work hard. I don't need a bodyguard. Or, or your protection. He leaned back, a subtle shift that created a chasm between them, a physical manifestation of the power imbalance. You misunderstand, Amara. This is not a choice. It is a consequence. My mother is a target. And now, so are you. The bluntness of his statement hit her like a physical blow. Her breath caught in her throat. A target?
What are you talking about?
He watched her, his gaze intense, as if assessing her reaction, her capacity for understanding. My family, he began, his voice dropping to a low, almost conspiratorial murmur, has certain interests. Interests that attract enemies. Enemies who would not hesitate to use any leverage they can find. And you, Amara, are now leverage. The truth, stark and brutal, settled over her. She had not only saved a life, but she had inadvertently become a pawn in a dangerous game, a piece on a chessboard she didn't even know existed. The cold from the lake, a distant memory, was replaced by a new, more insidious chill, a fear that seeped into her bones. But I don't even know what you do, she stammered, her mind racing, trying to process the implications. What kind of interests? Daisham's lips curved into a faint, humorless smile. Let's just say, Amara, that my family's business is comprehensive and not always confined to the legal parameters of polite society. The euphemism was clear. Mafia. The word, unspoken, hung in the air between them, a dark, terrifying truth. Amara felt a surge of nausea. Her carefully planned future, her dreams of healing and helping, suddenly felt like a fragile illusion, shattered by the stark reality of Daisham's world. So what? I'm just supposed to accept this? Live under constant surveillance? Be a target? Her voice rose, a desperate plea against the inevitable. He held her gaze, his eyes unwavering. You'll be safe, Amara. I will ensure it. But you will also be connected.
To me.
To my family. For as long as is necessary, the finality of his tone left no room for argument. Amara felt a wave of despair wash over her. She had fought for her life in the lake, had given everything to save a stranger, only to find herself trapped in a different kind of danger, a danger that promised to consume her entire existence. The restaurant's elegant ambience, the clinking of glasses, the hushed conversations, all seemed to mock her, a veneer of normalcy over the terrifying new reality that had just been laid bare. She was no longer just Amara, the nursing student. She was Amara, the girl who had saved the Mafia boss's mother, and her life, it seemed, would never be the same. The cold, once an external threat, had now seeped into her very soul. The revelation of Daisham's true nature, of his family's ties to the Korean Mafia, hit Amara with the force of a physical blow. The elegant restaurant, the soft lighting, the hushed conversations, all became a stage for a terrifying drama she had unwittingly stumbled into. She pushed her untouched plate away, the rich aroma of the food suddenly nauseating. So, you're telling me, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, that because I saved your mother, I'm now part of your world? A world of crime? Daisham watched her, his expression unreadable, a flicker of something in his eyes that might have been regret, quickly suppressed. It is not a world I would wish upon anyone, Amara, but it is the reality of my life. And now, unfortunately, it is intertwined with yours. He didn't try to sugarcoat it, didn't offer false reassurances. His honesty, brutal as it was almost more terrifying than any lie. You will not be asked to participate in our business. Your protection is simply a necessary measure until the immediate threat against my mother, and by extension, you, has passed. And when will that be? Amara demanded, a desperate hope clinging to her voice. When will I be free of this? He held her gaze, his dark eyes intense. When the people who wish my family harm are no longer a threat. That could be a while. The vagueness of his answer sent a fresh wave of despair through her. A while could mean anything. Weeks. Months. Years. A lifetime. Her life, her future, was now on an indefinite hold, suspended in a dangerous limbo. This isn't fair, she whispered. The words a raw, emotional plea. I didn't ask for any of this. Daisham's jaw tightened, a subtle clenching that betrayed a flicker of emotion. Life is rarely fair, Amara. But I give you my word, you will be safe. And when this is over, you will be free. And you will be generously compensated for your inconvenience. The mention of compensation, again, felt like an insult, a cold transaction for her lost freedom. I don't want your money, Dasham, she said, her voice rising with a surge of anger. I want my life back. He simply watched her unmoving, a statue of quiet power. The silence stretched, thick and heavy with unspoken threats and unyielding resolve. Amara felt a profound sense of helplessness. She was trapped, caught in the undertow of a world she didn't understand, controlled by a man who saw her as a debt to be managed, a pawn to be protected. The initial spark of attraction she had felt for him, the strange pull of his dangerous charisma, was now overshadowed by a chilling fear. He was not a hero. He was a captor, however benevolent. As the evening wore on, the conversation became stilted, punctuated by long silences. Amara ate little, her appetite gone. Dasham, on the other hand, ate with a quiet efficiency, his movements precise, controlled. He was a man accustomed to navigating dangerous waters, a master of his own dark domain. When the check arrived, he paid it with a casual wave of his hand, a small fortune disappearing without a second thought. As they walked out of the restaurant, the cool night air was a welcome relief, but it did little to dispel the suffocating feeling of being trapped. Jay was waiting by the black sedan, his impassive face illuminated by the streetlights. As Amara got into the car, she glanced back at Dasham, who stood by the curb, watching her. His silhouette, tall and imposing against the city lights, was a looming threat, a permanent shadow over her life. She had saved a life, but in doing so, she had lost her own, trading one kind of cold for another, far more dangerous one. The ensuing weeks were a suffocating ballet of surveillance and subtle coercion. Amara's life became a carefully choreographed routine, every move observed, every freedom curtailed. Jay, no longer just a driver, was a constant presence, waiting outside her classes, accompanying her on grocery runs, even sitting discreetly in the corner of the library while she studied. He was polite, almost robotic, but his constant proximity was a suffocating reminder of her new reality. Her friends, bewildered and concerned, began to keep their distance. Chloe tried, at first, to understand, to offer support, but Amara's evasiveness, her inability to explain the bizarre circumstances, eventually created a rift. Amara, you're not telling me something, Chloe had accused one afternoon, her voice laced with frustration. You're different. You're always looking over your shoulder. Who is this guy? And why is he always around? Amara had simply shaken her head, unable to articulate the terrifying truth. How could she explain that she was under the protection of a mafia boss? That her life, as she knew it, was effectively over? The isolation was profound, a bitter consequence of her unwitting heroism. Dasham, true to his word, kept his distance, communicating mostly through Jay, or with brief, infrequent phone calls that felt more like status checks than genuine conversations. His voice, though, still held that dangerous allure, a magnetic pull she fought against with every fiber of her being. One evening, after a particularly lonely day, Amara found herself staring at the empty seat beside her on the couch, wishing for Chloe's easy laughter, for the normalcy she had so carelessly lost. A wave of anger, hot and sharp, washed over her. She couldn't live like this. She wouldn't. She needed to fight back, to reclaim her life, even if it meant confronting Dasham directly. The next morning, instead of heading to her anatomy lecture, Amara instructed Jay to drive her to Dasham's office. She didn't know where it was, but Jay, ever efficient, simply nodded and set off. The building was a sleek, modern skyscraper, its polished facade reflecting the morning sun. The lobby was minimalist, intimidating, filled with men in dark suits who moved with an unnerving quietness. Amara felt a tremor of fear, but she pushed it down, fueled by a desperate need for answers. She was escorted to Dasham's office, a vast space on a high floor, with panoramic views of a city. He was seated behind a massive desk, a laptop open in front of him, his face illuminated by the screen's glow. He looked up as she entered, his dark eyes widening almost imperceptibly with surprise. Amara, he said, his voice a low rumble, devoid of his usual controlled calm. This is unexpected. I need to talk to you, she said, her voice firm, despite the tremor in her hands. I can't live like this, Dacian. I can't be a prisoner in my own life. He gestured to the chair opposite his desk, his gaze unwavering. Sit, Amara sat, her back straight, her chin held high. I appreciate what you've done, what you think you're doing, but I need my life back. I need to be free. This protection, it's suffocating me, he listened, his expression unreadable, his eyes never leaving hers. The silence stretched, heavy with unspoken tension. Then, he leaned forward, his elbows resting on the desk, his gaze intense. Amara, he said, his voice soft, almost a whisper. Do you truly believe I enjoy this? Do you think I want to involve an innocent like you in my world? His words, unexpected, caught her off guard. She had always seen him as cold, calculating, but there was a raw edge to his voice now, a hint of something deeper, something that resonated with her own despair. Then let me go, she pleaded, her voice cracking. Please, just let me go, he held her gaze, and for the first time, Amara saw a flicker of vulnerability in his dark eyes, a brief glimpse into the man beneath the impenetrable facade. It was a fleeting moment, gone as quickly as it appeared, but it was enough to plant a seed of doubt in her mind, a question about the true nature of their entanglement. He was a dangerous man, yes, but perhaps not entirely without a heart. The flicker of vulnerability in Dacian's eyes, fleeting as it was, ignited a spark of hope in Amara, a desperate belief that there might be a way out. Then let me go, she had pleaded, her voice raw with emotion. He had leaned back in his chair, the brief moment of shared humanity receding behind his usual controlled demeanor. Amara, he said, his voice regaining its customary calm. I cannot. Not yet. The threat is real. And it is not just against my mother anymore. It is against anyone connected to me. You are connected, the finality in his tone was crushing. Her hope, fragile as it was, withered. So, what am I supposed to do? She asked, a bitter edge to her voice. Just live like this forever? A ghost in my own life. He watched her, his gaze intense, assessing. You are not a ghost, Amara. You are a survivor. And you are strong. Stronger than you realize, his words, meant as a compliment, felt like a burden. And what about you? She challenged, a sudden surge of defiance. Do you enjoy this? Living in the shadows, constantly looking over your shoulder. A muscle twitched in his jaw, a subtle tell that betrayed a flicker of emotion. It is the life I was born into. The life I must lead to protect what is mine. His tone was devoid of self-pity, a simple statement of fact. Amara studied him, truly studied him, for the first time. The sharp lines of his face, the intensity of his eyes, the underlying weariness that even his impeccable suit couldn't hide. He was a man burdened by immense responsibility, a king in a dangerous, unseen kingdom. A sudden, unexpected wave of empathy washed over her, an understanding of the gilded cage he too inhabited. But there must be another way, she insisted, unwilling to give up. There has to be a way for me to be safe. Without being trapped, he leaned forward again, his gaze piercing. There might be, but it would require your cooperation. Your trust. Amara felt a jolt. Trust? After everything? What kind of cooperation? She asked, suspicion warring with a desperate sliver of hope. He paused, his eyes sweeping over her face, as if searching for something. My mother, she has grown fond of you. She sees something in you. A goodness, a strength. She has asked that you continue to visit her. To be a comfort during her recovery. Amara stared, dumbfounded. This was not what she expected. Visit your mother? That's it. He nodded. For now. It keeps you close. It keeps you within our sphere of influence, where we can ensure your safety more effectively. And it provides my mother with genuine companionship, which is rare in our world. There was a vulnerability in his voice, a hint of a son's genuine concern for his mother, that softened him, made him seem less like an unyielding captor and more like a complex, conflicted man. Amara felt a strange pull, a reluctant curiosity. This was not the freedom she craved, But it was a compromise, a small window of agency in a situation that had felt utterly hopeless. It was also an opportunity, she realized, to learn more about this hidden world, to understand the forces that held her captive. And in return, she asked, her voice cautious, in return, you will be safe. And when the time is right, when the threat has truly passed, you will be free. With no further obligations, he met her gaze, his dark eyes holding hers, and Amara saw a silent promise in their depths, a dangerous pact forged in the heart of his shadowy empire. It was a gamble, a terrifying leap of faith into the unknown, but for the first time since the lake, Amara felt a flicker of control, a fragile sense of purpose in her gilded cage. The cold, she realized, could also be a catalyst, forcing her to find warmth in unexpected places, even in the heart of a mafia boss. The arrangement, an uneasy truce forged in Daisham's opulent office, settled into a strange rhythm. Amara began visiting Mrs. Lee regularly, her initial apprehension slowly giving way to genuine affection for the old woman. Mrs. Lee, frail but sharp-witted, became a surprising confidant, her stories of a life lived on the fringes of power offering glimpses into Daisham's world, a world far more complex and morally ambiguous than Amara had imagined. "My son," Mrs. Lee would say, her eyes twinkling, "he carries a heavy burden. A burden he did not choose, but one he embraces with honor." Amara listened, her understanding of Daisham deepening with each visit. He was not just a ruthless mafia boss. He was a man bound by loyalty, by tradition, by a fierce, almost primal need to protect his family. His cold exterior, she realized, was a shield, a necessary armor in a brutal world. During these visits, Daisham would often be present, a silent, watchful shadow in the background. Their interactions remained formal, punctuated by polite inquiries and terse acknowledgments, but Amara felt a subtle shift in the air between them. A shared understanding, a quiet acknowledgement of the unspoken pact that bound them. She started seeing him differently, not just as her captor, but as a man trapped in his own way, a man fighting his own battles. The forced proximity, the shared vulnerability of caring for Mrs. Lee, began to chip away at the walls Amara had erected around her heart. She found herself noticing the small things, the way his eyes softened when he looked at his mother, the subtle tension in his shoulders when he received a hushed phone call, the rare, almost imperceptible smile that would touch his lips when Mrs. Lee recounted a particularly amusing anecdote. One afternoon, as Amara was leaving Mrs. Lee's room, Daisham stopped her in the hallway. "Amara," he said, his voice low, "my mother, she is happier since you began visiting." "Thank you." It was the closest he had come to expressing genuine gratitude, and the sincerity in his voice caught her off guard. "She's a wonderful woman, Daisham," Amara replied, a small smile touching her lips. "I enjoy spending time with her," he nodded, his gaze holding hers, and for a long moment, the sterile hospital corridor seemed to fade away, leaving only the two of them, suspended in a silent understanding. There was a raw intensity in his eyes, a depth that hinted at emotions carefully guarded, passions fiercely suppressed. Amara felt a strange pull, a dangerous magnetism that both thrilled and terrified her. The lines between protector and prisoner, captor and captive, began to blur, replaced by a more complex, ambiguous connection. She was still a pawn, yes, but perhaps a pawn with agency, a pawn who was beginning to understand the game, and perhaps even influence it. The cold of the lake, the terror of that morning, had led her to this unexpected, dangerous warmth, a warmth that promised both solace and potential devastation. She was no longer just surviving. She was navigating, adapting, and, perhaps, even falling into a world she never knew existed, a world defined by loyalty, danger, and the unexpected, potent connection between two unlikely souls. The ticking clock of her freedom was still present, but now, another clock had begun to tick, a clock marking the dangerous, exhilarating rhythm of a nascent, forbidden romance. The fragile peace Amara had found in her new, complicated life was shattered by a brutal act of violence that brought the full, terrifying reality of Daisham's world crashing down upon her. It happened swiftly, mercilessly. One evening, as Jay was driving Amara home from her final, triumphant nursing exam, a victory she had fought hard for amidst the chaos. Their car was ambushed. Tires screamed, glass shattered, and the familiar comfort of the black sedan was instantly replaced by the terrifying chaos of gunfire and shouted commands. Jay, ever vigilant, reacted instantly, swerving, his body a shield as he shoved Amara to the floor of the car. The world became a blur of motion, deafening gunshots, and the acrid smell of burning rubber. Amara, pressed against the floor, her heart hammering against her ribs, could hear Jay's grunts of exertion, the desperate struggle against unseen attackers. Then, a sickening thud, a sudden lurch, and the car spun violently before crashing into a lamppost, the impact throwing Amara against the dashboard. Darkness. When Amara finally regained consciousness, a searing pain shot through her head. The car was mangled, smoke curling from the engine. Jay lay slumped over the steering wheel, blood blooming on his pristine white shirt. "Jay!" Amara cried, her voice hoarse, a wave of panic washing over her. She scrambled over to him, her nursing instincts kicking in despite the throbbing pain. His pulse was weak, thready. He was barely breathing. Outside, the sounds of shouting and distant sirens grew louder. She knew they had to get out. As she struggled to pull Jay from the wreckage, a figure emerged from the shadows, tall and imposing. It was Dasham. His face was a mask of grim determination, his eyes, usually so controlled, blazing with a cold fury she had never witnessed before. He moved with a predatory grace, surveying the scene, his gaze instantly settling on Amara and the gravely wounded Jay. "Amara," he roared, his voice raw with a primal fear, rushing towards them. He knelt beside Jay, his hands moving with surprising gentleness, assessing the damage. "Who did this?" Amara whispered, tears streaming down her face, a mix of fear and grief for the loyal man who had protected her. Dasham's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing, a dangerous glint in their depths. "The ones who want to send a message. The ones who think attacking what is mine will break me." He looked at Amara, his gaze intense, and for the first time, she saw the raw, protective instinct that lay beneath his cold exterior. It was a fierce, almost desperate possessiveness, a silent declaration that she was, indeed, his. "We need to get him out of here," Amara urged, her nursing training overriding her fear. "He's losing too much blood," Dasham nodded, his focus shifting to immediate action. He lifted Jay with surprising ease, carrying him bridal style away from the wreckage, Amara scrambling to follow. The sirens were closer now, police lights flashing in the distance. They ran, Dasham a powerful force, Amara a terrified shadow, into the cover of the night. The attack was a brutal awakening, a stark reminder that Dasham's world was not just about quiet threats and silent protection. It was about visceral violence, about life and death. And Amara, by saving his mother, had irrevocably sealed her fate, becoming entangled in a dangerous dance where the stakes were her very survival. The cold of the lake, once a singular terror, had now become a constant, pervasive chill, a brutal reality that threatened to consume her entirely. She was no longer just under his protection. She was in the heart of his war, and the only way out, it seemed, was through him.